Hey guys, today we're gonna look into the basics of anti-stratting. If you want to try to prepare for an upcoming opponent, then you can try to follow my advice on how to do this.
This is a game between NRG and Liquid at the Blast Los Angeles. It's at LAN in 2019. So it's interesting to look at what Liquid is doing. They had an amazing run at this time. I want to dive into what they did and how I would prepare for them. When I anti-strat, I usually use most of my time looking into the terrorist side of the opponent. So usually I would only use a third of my time on the CT side and then 2/3 on the terrorist side. As an individual, you can also easily look through their terrorist side and see what kind of attacks they're doing on your side. And that can really ensure that you can be a step forward when the attack comes. So for example, here we have the CT pistol of Liquid. It's not something I would use a lot of time analyzing. It's a different pistol you will see from an opponent. Maybe if they win it flawlessly, I would maybe note it, but it's kind of a rock, paper, scissor kind of thing, because oftentimes you end up preparing for a pistol that's not going to come. So it's not something I would recommend using a lot of time on. But here it starts. They have aggressive setup towards A, so you can jiggle peek at some of these positions to ensure that you don't run into the stack. I usually use a more overview. Oftentimes it's not important to really get into the 3 dimensions and the details of that. I can use the overlay in the demo viewer, that's fine. There are some specific cases. For example, if you watch Nuke, it can get a bit tricky because that map is in multiple layers. So for that map, then it makes sense to go into 3 dimensions, especially if you want to prepare for an upper execute. That could be really tricky to watch in 2 dimensions because it's so small, the overview on that map. In this meta back in 2019, most of the time you would see CT force up into the second round. Today it's a bit different. If it were a match today, I would note that they chose to force up in the second round and not have a full eco, which is the more common. So here we have the first full buy versus full buy. At this point, it's important to start noting what the positions the players like, and it seems like they have a setup going here where Leash stands close by the toilet smoke. Nitro is a bit more passive with the AWP. There are different approaches to watching a demo and what you want to gain out of it. So say you're an AWPer and you want to know what kind of peaks the opponent AWPer takes, then I would skip quite fast through the rounds and just watch Nitro all the time where he goes. Common way of distributing responsibility on a team in terms of preparing for an opponent is that, for example, the AWPer of your team, he can either choose to watch out for how the enemy AWPer plays, but he can also choose to see, okay, is there anywhere I can get some easy peeks towards a rifle. As a coach, you have almost all the time you have the more broad responsibility. So you try to watch the whole map and take notes of what you see in their style of play that you can use to your advantage. Try to play some of your more default heavy strats instead of calling set strats towards this type of opponent. If you feel like that's not a lot of information you can gain during the rounds. If you feel like there's one of your set strats that could work really well against one of their common setups, then maybe that's the takeaway you take from watching the matches. On the terrorist side, the interesting stuff to look after is some sort of set executes. One round I found here is a set execute out of spawn where they rush short. It's a round where they have some leftover SMGs from the anti-eco. They have a quick smoke. Nitro is throwing this smoke really early, and that's actually really telegraphed from the terrorist side that these smokes come flying into the air. So that would be an important tell for me to tell the players that, okay guys, they have this kind of execute. They like to run it with SMGs. And you can see it, it's really telegraphed by this smoke that hangs in the air quite a while. If I'm preparing towards a default or watching multiple rounds of them running a default, I would try to look into gaps if they seem like to skip certain steps or rush through some of the control. And an example could be if I watch them peeking balloons really fast with no toilet smoke, or if they cross towards connector in a risky way, I would tell my AWPer that's likely a good peak. You can likely get a peak before the molly comes or whatever. If it's a really slow round, and especially on overpass, if you see them take control in many different ways, using the same kind of signals, then it's likely not to be that good of anti-stratting, because you're likely to guess wrong. But you can still gain like an abstract way of thinking about how they play as a team. What I've seen all rounds is that Twist and Elish are the two rifles that take control towards A. So they run like a pair all the time, and that's an important takeaway from my rifle, that he always expects two guys to be coming in. So let's say you get the first frag, he knows that's the second rifle is gonna try to trade immediately. Most players that has been playing Counter-Strike knows a really frustrating part is getting just destroyed by a really good execute. Preparing an opponent before you're playing them is a really strong way of countering the executes. So you can, before the match starts, you can look what kind of utility they throw and really prepare your defense against that. This sequence we have right here is an A execute from Liquid, and most matchmaking players would likely play really defensive on A, so the common spots are truck and side, and that would be a really bad choice if you were to end up against Liquid in the matchmaking, because Liquid throws these two smokes here and throws these pop flashes over the side, and you would be both blinded and obscured by the smokes. Before the match even starts, you would have to have a game plan that is more aggressive, so you don't get up blinded and smoked on the A side. Since they had success running these smokes, I would prepare my CC side more not to get caught behind the smokes like they did. We need to play more aggressively because we can't get caught behind smokes, so we might have to use some of our setups that are more aggressive towards the toilet area. An important part of preparing the CC side for your team is to note what kind of utilities they use as terrorists and what kind of early control they take. So in this match, I've seen them run the A default multiple times with 3 guys towards here, so that would likely be a point of emphasis for me. Note that Stu is the connected player, Naf is the B player, but also a switch-up round like they did in this round, where they take control of short really fast. It's also important for me to tell my team about, because essentially you can, if you see this combination of fast flashes on short and a guy peeking up short fast like this, then you can know that there's only Nitro towards A, Stu in under, and then 3 guys towards B. That means you can kind of cheat towards B and maybe retake short or fight short. But in general, you need to know what kind of utilities they use and what that means in terms of what positions and what map control they take.
If I have to sum it up to 3 important lessons, it's watching how they default and what kind of executes they run and what utilities they use in those, and just which positions they play and what utility they use in general. If you want to become a better player or a coach, then just start watching the demos.